So start with one story. That is what I want you to do. I don't want you to overwhelm yourself. I really want you to start with one story. Remember these steps of awareness, getting curious, the investigative part, and being creative. As you start with this one story, it doesn't have to be your life's biggest challenge, okay? Just one story. Be patient with yourself, be compassionate with yourself, show yourself grace, and acknowledge the progress that you're making. Even if it's a small win, acknowledge that, because that small win is making a change. It's going to build up over time to that life that you envision, that story that you're envisioning. Dr. Tamia Ryan, you can definitely call me Tamia, but this is my professional title. And by training, I've been a licensed clinical social worker for over 20 years. Within the past 5 years, I've also professionally transitioned over into the coaching space, but I am here today in the capacity as a coach. So sort of just piggybacking on that a little bit in terms of my background, I started out working with young people. So this is like the early Tamia, 20-year-old social worker, working with young people who were in crisis, who were experiencing abuse or neglect, families that were in crisis. And I learned very early on the power of stories. And so what I truly believe is that stories serve this threefold purpose of healing, inspiration, and connection, okay? And I learned early on that many of the young people and the families I was working with, they were working with these stories that had been handed down to them. And if you're new to working with me or experiencing any of my webinars or videos, I talk about this proverbial bag that we carry, okay? And it's a heavy bag, and it's often loaded up before the time we get here, okay? So we've got stuff in this bag that people have put in there. We've got stuff people have slipped in, we didn't even know. We've got our own stuff we've been hauling around, and you can imagine over years how heavy this bag gets. And so I like to ask people, like, when's the last time you've checked your bag? When's the last time you looked in to see what is really going on with what you're carrying? And all of the stuff's not bad per se, right? I mean, we get passed down a lot of good stuff too, right? A lot of our values, a lot of knowledge, a lot of things that have built us up. Our lived experiences, which, by the way, is the name of my company, The Lived Experiences. And the reason I named it that is because our lived experience shapes so much of who we are. But what happens when you decide to open up that bag and you see some stuff in there that you're like, wait a minute, I didn't even know this was in there. I thought I got rid of this, right? Who put this in there? And you don't have any room for the new things that you want. So we're going to talk today about how you can author your truth. And we hear a lot of buzzwords. We're going to break those down today too. Owning your narrative, authenticity. These are buzzwords that have become popular on social media. People are throwing them around, hashtagging them. Great, right? But after the hashtags are gone, what are you really left with? So I've always believed in the concepts of narrative work and storytelling. And I've always believed that we have to be our authentic selves. So if this sounds like something that's up your alley, I think you're going to enjoy what we talk about today. And I want to be vulnerable with you, and I want to talk a little bit about how I sort of got to this place, okay? And feel free, as we're talking, you can share things in the chat as well. Just making sure that everyone's still able to see everything and hear me okay. You can just throw a yes in there just to make sure we're good on the tech end. So I was at a point in my life where I had started really getting burnt out, personally, professionally. And how many of you have felt that point in your life where you felt like you've been burnt out, whether it was personally or professionally? Yes. And I was at this point where I started to notice that I had sort of started becoming this person known as the nice one, okay? The fixer. And at first it felt really good, right? Like everybody would come to me for everything. I would fix it, I would help them, I would take it on, and it was great. But I started noticing how burnt out I was getting from this. And this especially became visible to me after I had my first son, because now my life had changed, priorities had changed, and I'm trying to figure all of this out. So I was living in this story where the voices were louder than my own. Everyone's fears were becoming my fears. Their limitations were becoming my limitations. I was taking on everything, and I'd really sort of become this like eternal people pleaser. And if you've ever experienced that, you know how overwhelming it is, and you're aware of how hard it can be to make a change with that, okay? So I was prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own, okay? And I was feeling trapped in this story of being the nice one, right? And what I've started to do is I started to shift away from that identity of being the person that had to take everything on, and becoming a person that was a kind person and not just a nice person. So you might be asking, okay, that's great, but how do you do that? How do you just start making a change? So we've been conditioned as a society to go after the goals, right? The big picture. How many of you have said, I'm just looking at the big picture, right? Have you ever said that or thought that? I'm just looking at the big picture. And that's a great way to look at goal planning. But what it also does is it creates opportunities of not being able to sustain what we're trying to accomplish, okay? Because we're conditioned so much as a society to focus on the end goal that we don't enjoy the process of getting there. So that's going to be my challenge throughout today as we talk and as you reflect on things. And I want you to be able to go back and look at this again. That's why I'm sending you the recording, because I realize that it's a lot to make changes, okay? But I want you to think about, what would your life look like if you didn't just focus on the goal, but you focused on the process of who you're becoming? And that's a big change. And so for me, what I did to kind of move away from this people pleaser sort of identity that I had taken on is I just made one small change, one small adjustment initially, okay? So I'm not going to ask you to say, all right, I'm going to just everything in my life is just going to be a total upheaval, because that's not sustainable and that's not realistic. And that's what gets us frustrated and overwhelmed. What I'm going to ask you to do is to think about one small change that you can make in your life, and how that change is going to help you evolve and help create that new story. So for me, what I did, the first thing that I did was, instead of immediately saying yes to people, I just started telling people, I'll get back with you. Let me check my calendar. It was just a small little change, okay? And it felt really weird at first, because I was used to just rapid firing yes, right? And it was like this one day I realized I had like triple booked myself with like things that I told people I was going to do. And like I got it all done, but I was like totally overwhelmed with it. I like stayed late. I was like rushing to the daycare. I mean, it was just like, I can't keep doing this. So I just started with one small change of just telling people, I'll get back to you, suggesting another date, suggesting another time, just making small adjustments. So what I'm asking you to do as we talk today is to think about small adjustments that you can make. Making that small adjustment tremendously changed my interactions with people. Now, was it always comfortable? No. I'm not going to lie and say that changing your story, rewriting the script is always easy, especially as you show up as the new person, right? And when you show up as a new person, people are like, wait a minute, that's not the same Audrey. That's not the same Angela, right? People are now expecting the old you. And that's where it can get challenging, and that's where a lot of that work comes in. So I'm hoping to have a great conversation, and love to also hear just about your personal experiences as well, as we get started today. So as I mentioned, this journey is really about self-discovery, and it's also about empowerment. I'm hearing a lot of folks now saying that they're burnt right now. They're going through it. And, you know, when you're feeling like you're going through it, sometimes you feel like there's no end in sight, right? I know that's how I have felt before. You know, I felt like I'm doing this and yeah, I'm trying to make the changes and it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. When we go through this journey and as we talk about this today, what I want you to realize is that there are things that are going to happen in our life. Health problems, relationships are going to end. Bosses are going to piss us off. Co-workers are going to piss us off. Our family is going to get on our nerves. There's going to be things that are going to happen in our life, okay? And we may not be able to change what's happening in our life, but what we can change, and you've all heard the expression, we can change how we interact, right, with these characters in our life. We can change how we allow it to take us to the zone or not, okay? And so it's not, today we're not just talking about learning concepts, but I really want you to learn how you can take back your story. Because you may have felt this, I know I have felt this in my life before, where I felt like somebody else was writing the story for me and I was just kind of like a supporting cast member, if that. You know, I might have been an extra, you know, the person that's walking in the crowd, you know, and it's like everybody else is dictating our narrative for us. And so how do you take it back? That's what I want to focus on today. Now, just doing a quick check, and feel free to throw this in the chat. How many of you feel like you need to rewrite your whole story? How many of you are feeling like, I just need to make some edits? And how many of you are just unsure of what you need to do? And that's okay too, because sometimes we just don't even know. We're just still trying to figure it out. So where would you say you are at in your journey? Would you say you're ready for a whole new story, whole new supporting cast? Are you just kind of not sure yet? Or you got it figured out, you know exactly what you want? And you can feel free to throw that in the chat as we're talking today. So when we talk about the power of our story, okay, and I told you early on, I learned really early on how powerful our stories are and how much they influence our life. So a lot of times we think that our stories are just memories or things that have just happened to us, okay? And I want you to think about it in a different way. Don't think about your life as something that's just happening to you. There are things that we experience, right? But once we start believing that things are just happening to us, now we're feeling like, okay, I have no control. It's just happening to me. So our stories are dynamic. I talk a lot about this continuum, okay? Our stories are living, they're breathing. They shape every aspect of our life. And the way that we tell the story about ourselves, that's how we see ourselves. And so when we constantly reinforce what everyone else is telling us, we start taking it on. And we might say, no, I'm not doing that to me. I'm not taking it on. But how many times have you said, you know what? I just let people take advantage of me. I keep meeting the wrong people. I keep doing this. I keep doing that. And we keep telling ourselves that this is who we are, right? And if the more that we tell ourselves this is who we are, whether it's a negative component or a positive component, we start actually reinforcing and taking on those behaviors. So I'm looking here at the comments. Angela, thank you. You said, I need to rewrite my entire story. Editing won't help. And Barbara mentioned work changes, friendships, social life. So let's go back to what, thank you both for sharing that. Sometimes it is necessary to rewrite the whole story. Because if you've ever worked on, I don't know how many of you have ever had to work on a manuscript, a paper, something at work, even an email, even a Facebook post, okay? You go back and you try to make some edits and you make one change here, but then you go to the next line and it doesn't match up. Right? And then you forgot to add a comma here. and now it just doesn't make sense. And then you're just like, you know what? I just need to rewrite this thing all over, right? I just need to start fresh. Sometimes our life takes us to that, right? Because, you know, we're seeing this a lot on social media too. And I'm a big proponent of self-care, but self-care has been watered down a lot through social media, right? It's been made to seem as if you take a vacation, you go to the spa, you go to the gym, everything's great. Everything's back to what it needs to be. Now, we need those things. Don't get me wrong. I love a vacation. I love a nice massage, okay? I love a shopping trip. I love all of that. But I remember going on vacation and coming back more stressed than I was when I left. Because I'm coming back to the same stuff, right? So what did I do? I just put a Band-Aid on it. I just prolonged what I was going through. And so I appreciate what you said, Angela, because we do need to sometimes just take a step back and say, you know what, this whole thing needs to be rewritten and I need to start fresh. And that process is scary, but it can really be empowering because now you're in control. Barbara, you mentioned going through work changes, friendships, and social life. You know, our lives, we're humans, right? Our lives are interconnected with other people, right? How many times have you thought to yourself, well, if it was just me doing this, it'd be fine, right? But when you have to interact with other people and other people are influencing your decisions, you're relying on other people to get X, Y, and Z done before you can do this, it can be stressful. Change can be stressful. What I want to tell you is, although it feels messy and uncomfortable, when you emerge on the other side, as you continue to evolve, and remember, we're focusing on the process, not just the end result. And you look at how you've changed and how you've made that story your own, you're going to feel different. You're going to feel confident, even though sometimes it's uncomfortable when you show up as the new you. So let's get a little bit clearer on what I mean when I talk about personal narrative, okay? Because again, that's a buzzword we hear a lot. Take back your narrative, own your narrative. Again, it's not the things that have happened to you. It's the ongoing story that you're telling yourself about who you are, what you're capable of, how the world works. And these narratives, they actually operate like scripts that are running and guiding our thoughts, emotions, and actions. I'm going to have an exercise here for you in a second, but these are scripts that are running through our mind. We're not even aware of it a lot of times because we're just so used to telling ourselves certain stories or believing that the story that has been created for us, because remember, we come into this world with like part of our story already, the outline is written, right? But go back to what I just said, the outline is written. That's not your permanent story. It's never permanent, okay? Even if you're coming in with this outline that's written, you always have the ability to take back some control of that. This image here of my story that I'm showing on the screen, this really captures the heart of what we're talking about today. Recognizing that you're the author of your story. So if you have the pen in your hand, you get to decide what gets written next. And that can be a hard shift, especially if you're used to everyone sort of influencing how your life story goes. So the story cycle. Our stories operate in a cycle, okay? As I mentioned, they tell ourselves, the more that we tell ourselves something, the more we begin to believe it. It shapes our expectations. So if you have taken on this identity of being the nice one, okay, I'll use myself as an example. I'm the nice one. I'm the fixer. I'm the one who's there for everyone. I've taken this identity on. So I've now set up this expectation that I have to continue to do all of these things to fulfill this identity that I've taken on, okay? So our expectations influence what we notice and how we act. So I'll say that again. Our expectations influence what we notice and how we act. So we filter things out, okay? If it doesn't match the story, that we are accustomed to, we might disregard it. We might ignore it. We might fight up against it. So we have this filter that we also subconsciously use. Now, doing all of this turns into a cycle, okay? We feel we have to act a certain way, so we act a certain way. And we continue this cycle over and over again. And that's why simply just trying to change a behavior isn't going to work without addressing the underlying narrative. So I'll use myself again as an example. I have been trying to lose some weight, and I've been successful sometimes, and other times I've not. I've been more successful the past 6 to 9 months. And I'll say 6 to 9 because I had some relapses. I'm not going to lie. But I've been most successful because I started going about it a different way. I was trying to just change the behavior, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to lose weight. And I just said it a minute ago, but what I really mean is I want to try to live a healthier life. Okay? So once I started thinking in that way, it helped me to make better decisions. Because I wasn't just changing my behavior, I'm trying to change the story behind it. I'm looking for what are the emotional triggers? What are the things that are making me be like, okay, I'm going to go grab this to eat as opposed to this, right? I needed to understand what was causing it instead of just trying to change the behavior. So when you look at your life and you're like, why does this keep happening to me, right? We say that. Why does this keep happening to me? Take a step back. Take the blame away, because we blame ourselves a lot too. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Take the blame away and just look at what is the story around this. What are the patterns around this? A lot of times we talk about habits. I like to say patterns, because habits, habits we can kind of break, right? We might have had a bad habit we picked up. Okay, we can break that, right? What do they say? Research says about 2 weeks to break a habit. I like to talk in patterns, and I like to talk in themes, because those are deep rooted. Again, this is stuff we've been carrying for a long time. So, got a question for you that I'm going to ask you to think about. Before we get there, want to check in with everybody. How's everyone doing? Does anyone have any questions? Anything they want to share? Are we enjoying this? Are we going up the right alley of what you were hoping to talk about today? So just doing a quick check-in. Kenny said, I'm the same way. I talk and think in patterns and themes. Yes. And again, that's a shift and a change for some of us, because, we're, again, so focused on the end goal. We're not thinking about, this is some deep-rooted stuff, right? Like, this is some stuff like I've been carrying for a very, very long time. Question for you. You can put it in the chat. You can just think about it. You can keep it to yourself. But I want you to take a minute to think about, what stories have you noticed that you've been telling yourself? And it could be one story. It could be around your professional life. It could be around your personal life. It could be several stories, because a lot of times we got several things going on. But I want you to think of at least one story that you've been telling yourself that you might want to change. And just think about that for a moment. A story that you've noticed yourself telling. So we're going to have just a few seconds to think about that, and you can throw that in the chat. Angela says, I have the nice girl syndrome and thus leaves me depleted. Yes. The nice syndrome is real, y'all. I mean, it's exhausting, and people stay stuck in it. Now, you also have the extremes, because remember, I talk about continuums all the time. You have the people who have the wall up. They not letting nothing in, right? They're not letting nothing in, nobody in. But that also is problematic, right? Because they're losing out on opportunities. I worked with someone, and they won't mind me sharing this story. I'm not going to share their name. but they have put a wall up. They went from nice person to I'll say their word, mean person, right? So it did a reverse for them. They went from, I'm doing everything, to like, don't bother me. I don't want to be bothered by anyone. And so what happened when they went to that extreme was they were missing out on opportunities. They weren't applying for jobs. They had stopped socializing with people. They had stopped interacting with people. And so we did a lot of work on creating a balance, right, of doing away with the extremes, like that black and white thinking of it's got to be this way or it's got to be that way. Sometimes there are things in our life we have to be very clear like that on, right? But again, we're humans, we're complex. So many times there's going to be this gray area. We have to establish those boundaries. So thank you for sharing that, Angela. So now that you've thought about, again, a story that you would like to maybe change or make some edits or maybe do away with the whole thing, I'm going to talk a little bit about a framework that I use with people that I want you to hopefully start integrating into your life, okay? And so this framework is designed to help you start changing your narrative, okay? It's rooted in theory, but it's also practical, meaning you can start using it today. Because even though much of what we hold and carry has been given to us or we've experienced throughout several years, as I mentioned, there are things you can do today that you can start making those adjustments. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. And hopefully you can start applying that in your life today, walking away today with a tip or a tool that you can use. So there's 3 parts to this, okay? The first part is the story awareness, and that's probably the hardest part. People think implementing concepts or implementing change is the hardest part. The hardest part is actually being aware. Because if you're not aware, you're not even going to know what direction to go in. So that question I asked you to think about stories, I asked you that because I need for you to first recognize the stories that you're telling. And so that's why you might need to go back. You might need to reflect for a little bit, and that's okay. But the first part is recognizing the stories that you're telling and be real with yourself. This is you. This is the author. You don't have anybody else around. This is you thinking about the story that has been playing out in your life. The second part is where you get curious. You get to investigate. And we're going to break each one of these down. And that's when you begin to think about, okay, what do these stories mean? How have they really been impacting my life? Where did they come from, right? How many times have you been told a story, or sometimes it's a myth, right? And it's just been passed down to you, and someone asks you, well, where did that come from? And you're like, well, my mom told me, and her mom told her, and I don't know, somebody told them, right? And so again, sometimes these values and knowledge that we're learning can be great for us, right? But what if it's something that's been told to us that we've just sort of carried on that really doesn't apply to our life? Is it okay to discard it? It doesn't mean that we have to ignore it, right? But what part does it play in your life? The third part is the story creation part. And this is the fun part, because this is when you get to say, Angela, I'm not the nice one anymore. This is when you get to say, Naija, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, I don't need to feel burnt out. You know, this doesn't have to be my life. So this is the funny part. The fun part, I'm sorry. It can be funny too, depending on what you discover. But this is what I call the fun part, because you get to really just take back that control. Yes, Kenny, overcorrection, going from one extreme to another. That's what happens to us. We live in this black and white thinking, right? It's got to be this way, it's got to be that way. Well, I'm here to tell you your story doesn't have to be that clear cut, okay? Your story is what you make it. So let's break down these concepts and really understand how you can apply it in your life. So story awareness that I mentioned, that's the uncomfortable part, okay? because now you have to be real with yourself and notice that you're in a story. Okay, you got to notice that, uh-oh, I'm doing it again. Or, uh-oh, I didn't even know I was doing this. But, looking back and just seeing how some things have played out in my life, this is the story that I'm in. So every day, I want you to do this one small, as you're working through this, as you're working through your one story. And I want you to start with just one story. Even though you might have multiple ones going on in your head, I want you to start with one story. And I want you to notice situations that trigger you and process the story that comes with it, okay? Because you can't change if you don't recognize what is happening to you. So you have to develop the awareness of your current story. That's when you know like a change needs to happen, when you don't want that story or identity anymore. Like, you don't want to be the nice girl anymore, right? You don't want to feel burnt out anymore. You don't want to feel like you have no control over your life anymore. That's when you know like you're being pushed. It's uncomfortable, but you're being pushed, right? This trigger practice, I encourage you, if you don't journal, and you don't have to handwrite journal, like I say a lot of stuff in my phone, I record things in my phone. There's a lot of different ways that you can notate things that are happening in your life, but our lives are so busy. I encourage you to get this information down somewhere, right? In your phone, send yourself a note, write it down, because you'll want to go back and process everything. Okay, here's an exercise. Complete this sentence. So in thinking about your story, the story I tell myself about whatever that situation or event, and fill in that blank. So I'll give you an example of a story sentence that I might have used. The story I tell myself about being nice is that I have to help people because I'm a social worker. It's my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. Okay. So that was like a sentence that I would tell myself to try to support the burnout that I was experiencing. This is my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. Once I started unpacking how that line in my life was creating and fueling me feeling overwhelmed, I was able to start rewriting this sentence. The story I tell myself about being a great social worker is that I'm going to set healthy boundaries. So I started reframing what I thought about who my identity was. Does that make sense? I started rewriting the components or the characteristics of my identity. This is called story catching, because we're taking that story and we're identifying the parts that are helping this story stay alive that we need to change. So this is like the editing, right? So even if you're like rewriting your whole story, like you've got to identify the parts that you need to change. So the story catching part is about developing the skill to notice when you're in a story and it's a negative story for you. And remember, for you. So it's not what it is for somebody else. So I can say, hey, I'm Tamia. I'm a mom. I'm a social worker. I'm a coach. I'm a daughter. Yes, I'm all of these roles. But who is Tamia? Okay? So don't think of this as what roles you take on, because you're going to be a part of other people's dynamics and other people's stories. But remember, this is, if there was nothing else, no other supporting characters, and we're just focusing on you as the main person, that is how you take back control of your story. It doesn't mean you don't have these other roles. I'm always going to be a mom. I'm always going to be a spouse. I'm always going to be this. But what is my identity? And sometimes we can lose our identity as our lives change. So the first part of this social sort of experiment here is being aware of your story. As I mentioned, the self-awareness is important. Identifying the triggers that cause you to jump back into that same plot, that same storyline, okay? And noticing these triggers. So spend a few weeks just noticing the triggers, right? A trigger for me in the nice person syndrome was when people said they really needed it and no one else could help them but me. Well, that kind of feels good to your ego. Like, I'm the only person that can help them. Oh, that feels good. I feel like I have to help this person. That was the trigger for me. When people would come to me with urgency and it was like there was no one else that could help, when reality was there probably was. Even if I was the person that could help them, I needed to set terms, right, on what that was going to look like. So identify those triggers. What are some of the triggers that you all find that keep you in your story? Feel free to share that. What are some of the triggers that you feel like keep putting you back in your story? For me, it was just that urgency. People come in and just needing me, right? And I felt like I couldn't say no. How do I say no? As you're thinking about that, I want to get into the part that requires some work as well, and that's the investigation part, okay? Because as we think about what we're experiencing, what's happening to us, now we need to work on ways that we can start creating our story. So once you're aware of your stories, then we have to start asking questions. And this isn't about judging. And it's not about toxic positivity. You all know what toxic positivity is. Toxic positivity, that's another buzzword, but it's actually a real thing. It's when we just say everything happens for a reason. I've said it. I've had people say it to me. It's that term that just makes everything seem like it's supposed to be what it is, right? I've moved away from saying that because it doesn't allow the person to process what they're feeling, okay? So I don't want you to get stuck in toxic positivity land as you're doing this. I really want you to get curious about why your story is playing out the way it is. I want you to get curious about what you would want it to look like, but I don't want you to get focused on perfection either. Okay? This part is really more questions that you're asking. What if there's more to the story than you initially thought, right? You've been told this, you've been conditioned to believe this, you've been accustomed to living a certain way, but what if that's not the way that it has to be? Questions, all right? Story awareness, you identify a point in your life that you want to change. Now you're getting curious about it. Now you're unpacking it, okay? And that takes some work. You know, this isn't something that you might do overnight, right? So give yourself space with this. This is also a part where sometimes you have regret and you have guilt and you have shame, because it's very easy for us to start blaming ourselves for the things that we're experiencing, right? Mistakes that we felt we've made. Well, you know what? I did it to myself. I was in a bad relationship and this person mistreated me, and you know what? I just shouldn't have picked that person. Well, no, that person shouldn't have treated you that way, right? But now in our new story, we're setting better boundaries. We know what our needs are and we're learning how to communicate our needs, okay? So we're moving away from I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. There's nothing wrong with self-accountability, but you also have to now lay out the groundwork for how it's going to look different, okay? So for the story that we identified earlier, and this was the story that I asked you a little bit ago as we started talking about self-awareness, what's one piece of evidence that doesn't completely fit with that story? Okay? So if I'm telling myself I have to be the nice person, if I'm thinking back, you know, I don't have to be the one to fix everything. There's other people here that can also provide support. So that was another lesson that I learned. I was taking on everything. Meanwhile, there's like literally 25 other people that can also assist. There's also this person is asking me to do this for them, and they're actually very capable of doing it also, right? So I had to start challenging those thoughts that I was having, those automatic thoughts of, I have to do this. This is the way things are, right? So as you're going through this, we're picking holes in the story so we can break it down, okay? We're picking holes in the story. And so as I started breaking away from that nice person syndrome, I started identifying alternate versions that were allowing me to break away from that role that I had taken on, but also become comfortable with taking on. So remember, in doing this work, the goal it's not to invalidate your experience, okay? This is not an opportunity for you to say, I experienced this and I just need to get over it. You do have to sit in the mess sometimes. You do have to experience the uncomfortability of it. Things we're going to experience in life are not right. They can make us sad. They can make us angry. They can make us hurt. Okay? Those feelings are real. And when I say let something go, I don't mean forget it and act like it didn't happen. That's a whole nother webinar on a whole different topic, because a lot of times we do that too. We just say, I'm fine. Everything's great. I'm letting it go. The goal of this is to see if there's more to the story, right? And how we can change it. A lot of grace with this process, a lot of self-grace that we may not be accustomed to. We can be really hard on ourselves, and we can push ourselves to points, like I mentioned, that are not sustainable. So this is a self-forgiving process. This is a process where hopefully you can find healing as you work through your story. So let's get to the last component here, which is the fun part, the story creation. And this is where you get to be creative and craft the stories that are real for you, that sit right with you. These aren't fantasies, right? Like I said, we're not just coming up with a laundry list of things that we don't think that we can ever accomplish. It's about finding a realistic truth for you that is designed, that is for you, not for anyone else. So I want you to start with that original story that you thought about a few minutes ago. And I want you to create a shift in that story that feels true, that feels authentic, that feels like it's something that you can sustain and accomplish. And I want you to find the evidence that supports that. And I want you to practice telling yourself this new story every day. So just one small change, right? For me, I don't have to, my original story, I'm the nice person, I'm the fixer, I have to do everything. A small shift that I made, I can be a kind person, okay? I went from thinking, nice, it just sounds great, to I can still be a kind person with boundaries. That was my shift. The evidence in that was that I was still being helpful. I was still being supportive, but I was also including other people that could provide support. I was showing people how to do something so that they could independently do it themselves the next time. Okay? So when you come to me to fix it, let's walk through this together. Okay? Now, next time when this happens, you'll be able to take this on. I started believing in myself, believing in this new identity that I was forming. It was not always comfortable in the beginning because, like I said at the top of this hour, people are going to challenge your new story. So that's why you have to practice telling the new story, and you got to get ready. Okay? I did a talk at the beginning of the year about New Year's resolutions. I don't like New Year's resolutions anymore. Okay? If they work for you, great. For me personally, I moved away from them because I didn't find them sustainable. So practice telling yourself this new story. Start implementing it every day, and you might have to communicate things have changed, right? When I started having my own family and children, I had to communicate to people all the time. Hey, this is a new to me. I can't do this, and that anymore, right? I had to communicate that change. They didn't always get it. And sometimes I think they still wanted me to go back to that old me. And I had to reinforce, this is the new me. Okay. So that reinforcement part is really important, because people are going to try you. And it's not because they're trying to be malicious. It's just because, again, they're used to you showing up as you were. So like an example might be someone saying, I always freeze up in important conversations, right? This is the identity that they've put on themselves. This is what they have told themselves, and this is what they believe to be true. That they always freeze up, maybe in a big interview or having an important conversation. How they would rewrite that is, sometimes I get nervous in important conversations, and I'm learning techniques to help me communicate more clearly. So they're reframing that identity into something new. It's not a big change, right? But that shift mentally helps this person start thinking about their experiences and their interactions in a new way. So that's what I'm really wanting you to do, is to start changing how you talk to yourself, what you think about yourself, because that's powerful. That's what keeps this story and this dynamic going. So as we start to wrap up here, again, small shifts, big changes. Your new story doesn't have to be dramatically different, especially in the beginning. Start off with the small shifts. Start off with what is sustainable for you. The goal is that the story will feel true to your experience as you continue to open up the new possibilities and the opportunities. And this is why I love journaling so much, is because as you're going through this, I really want you to document in some way, and however you decide to do that, how you're evolving, how you're changing. That is the beauty of this. As you begin to create your new story, you are evolving, you are changing into a new person. And so when you go back and look, I mean, I am still the core Tamia that I've always been, but I am not the same person that I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago. I've made changes in my life. So when you go back and you look at that process, it's really empowering, and it makes you feel like you're in control. Do we control everything? No. That's life. We're never going to be able to control everything, right? But we can control our perspectives and how we interact with our experiences. So start with one story. That is what I want you to do. I don't want you to overwhelm yourself. I really want you to start with one story. Remember these steps of awareness, getting curious, the investigative part, and being creative. As you start with this one story, it doesn't have to be your life's biggest challenge, okay? Just one story. Be patient with yourself. Be compassionate with yourself. Show yourself grace, and acknowledge the progress that you're making. Even if it's a small win, acknowledge that, because that small win is making a change. It's going to build up over time to that life that you envision, that story that you're envisioning. And be realistic, okay? There are no perfect lives. I mean, you could have all the money in the world, all the riches in the world. You could have the perfect relationship you think. There is no perfection in our life, okay? Some days are going to be easier than others, and that's okay, all right? Do not stress yourself out trying to lead a perfect life. Do not look at someone's Instagram page and say that they're leading the perfect life. We have moments of happiness. We have moments of goodness in our life, but we know that that can change very dramatically, very quickly, right? So it really is, that saying day to day, that's real for me. Like, I say it all the time to clients that I work with, because we get so focused on the future. And the future is important, but we also are in the here and the now. So I hope that this was helpful for you. I also just want to give you a little bit of information about ways that we can continue to work together and ways that you can continue to connect with me. I have a monthly coaching group. It's an opportunity for us to have a monthly group session. We'll also, you'll have access to all my courses. You'll also have access to free workbooks. And so it's just an opportunity where I can connect with more people in a group setting. And so that's the Lived Experience Circle. We'll do the monthly group sessions. They will be recorded if you're not able to make it, but it's just an opportunity to connect. So if you are interested in learning more about that, you can go ahead and sign up on my website. I try to keep, new things coming for folks if you want to work together a little bit closely. So I really appreciate your time today, being here and sharing. So thank you so much for sharing. I want you to continue this work. Sometimes we attend webinars and then we just kind of forget about it or forget about the things we've learned because life is so busy. So I'd love for you to watch the recording again. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.